So Uthman decided, this is the Quran we'll follow. All the other Qurans need to be burned. Who gave him the authority to burn down Qurans that Muhammad's own companions learned from Muhammad directly? Thank God no Christian ever had a Christian Uthman doing that to the Bible. But then it gets worse.
Another thing that I think many Christians and people in the West don't know is the history of the attempt to create a single Quranic version. I didn't know this until I really started looking into Islam a few years ago. This is the whole history of Uthman and the burning, and they often make this argument that, well, we have a perfectly preserved history of the Quran. The Bible has a lot of thousands of manuscripts from the first few centuries, therefore we have a superior revelation, which itself is actually fraudulent, because if the argument is that it needs to be closer to the time of the revelation to be accurate, well, the Gospels are actually far closer to the time of Christ than the Quran is. So why would we expect the Quran to give us accurate history of Christ? Their very argument undercuts the history of the Quran itself, because it's far away from, it's much further from the time of Christ than the Gospels are. But we're supposed to believe that this is somehow a better accurate representation of what Jesus taught somehow. Could you tell us about the history of the burning of the texts?
Precisely. Again, this is all based on Muslim sources, not Islamophobic literature. For example, as I mentioned earlier, the largest sect of Islam would be the Sunni sect. So they follow the Quran and Sunnah. They have a set of traditions that they have classified, whether sound, absolutely reliable, good, weak, or forgeries. The information I'm giving is based on what they deem to be the most authentic, sound narrations that they claim can go back to Muhammad. Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, and others. According to their sources, when Muhammad died, his own companions, people that followed Muhammad, learned the Quran from Muhammad, were now writing down what they learned from Muhammad in manuscripts, their version of the Quran, and they were in conflict. The differences were so bad. And by the way, for the Muslims who think I'm lying, I'll even give you the reference. If you go online, sunnah.com, Sahih Bukhari, volume 6, numbers 509, 510. That's all you need to remember. Sahih Bukhari, volume 6, number 510, and then read 509 before you read 510. And there it says that the differences were so great, and these are Qurans written down by Muhammad's companions, that they almost came to blows because they're accusing the others of corrupting the Quran. So much for memorization, preserving the Quran, because that's another canard. Well, they memorized the Quran and preserved it. Well, Muhammad's companions, when they wrote down what they memorized, full of contradictions. So the third caliph, Uthman ibn Affan, third caliph, decided, and this is around 650 AD. Now, this is according to Sunni tradition. If you go to Orientalist scholars or Islamic scholars who are not committed to the Sunni tradition, they don't believe much of these traditions. They believe it's forgeries, because the sources that contain these traditions are nearly 20 years removed from the time of Muhammad's reported life. So they take them with a pinch of salt. But with that said, Uthman decided to standardize one Quran, a Quran compiled by a man named Zayd ibn Thabit. Now, Zayd converted to Islam years later after Muhammad had went to Medina. And so he decided to standardize that Quran. Now, there were other Muslims who had been Muslims from the time of Mecca, way before Zayd, one in particular named Abdullah ibn Masud. He learned the Quran, he mastered its recitation, and even Muhammad's companions say, among all the Muslims, he and another man named Ubay were the best. When he wrote down the Quran, his Quran contradicted Zayd's, and he refused to give it up. Uthman demanded they be burned. He didn't want to. It got to the point that Uthman insulted this man, Abdullah, who was a companion of Muhammad, and they were companions, and cited a riot. He got beat. He had his ribs broken because of it. So Uthman decided, this is the Quran we'll follow. All the other Qurans need to be burned. Who gave him the authority to burn down Qurans that Muhammad's own companions learned from Muhammad directly? Thank God no Christian ever had a Christian Uthman doing that to the Bible. But then it gets worse. That so-called Uthmanic recension, when it was transmitted, it came down to the Muslims in at least 25 different Arabic variant forms of that Uthmanic text. 300 years after the death of Muhammad, a man named Ibn Mujahid decided, I'm going to standardize 7 of the 25. Once again, by what authority? He's not a prophet. He's not a messenger. Who gave him that right? So even Muslims will admit that the present Arabic Quran You can't trace it any earlier than Uthman. And even then, they have at least 7 different Arabic variants that are not 100% consistent with one another. So much for perfect preservation.
Right, yeah. And by the way, even if theoretically there were perfect preservation, I mean, error can be perfectly preserved as well. So it wouldn't necessarily prove anything, even if it were the case. And of course, it's not the case according to the hadiths.